Stealing Freedom, the Captain of the Abyss. Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, May 13th, 1862, 3:15 a.m. The straw hat felt heavy. It wasn't the weight of the weave, it was the weight of the man who usually wore it. To anyone watching from the dark docks of the Southern Confederacy, the silhouette pacing the deck of the CSS Planter looked exactly like Captain C.J. Ellison. The figure wore the captain's signature wide-brimmed straw hat. He wore the captain's long pea coat. He folded his arms across his chest with the same arrogant casualness the Confederate officers displayed. But the man beneath the brim was not Captain Ellison. He was Robert Smalls, and he was property. Smalls gripped the wooden railing, his knuckles ashing white against his dark skin. The night was thick with the smell of salt, gunpowder, and the stagnant humidity of the Carolina coast. Inside the wheelhouse, the brass instruments gleamed in the low lantern light, instruments of war belonging to the Confederate States of America. Smalls took a breath. If he succeeded in the next 2 hours, he would change the course of the American Civil War. If he failed, he and everyone he loved, his wife, his children, his crew, would be executed for treason and insurrection. There was no middle ground. "Robert," a whisper came from the shadows. It was John Smalls, no relation, the engineer. His voice trembled. "The officers, they're really gone?" "They are sure," Smalls said, his voice dropping to a gravelly baritone, imitating the white captain he was impersonating. "They are ashore, drinking at the ball, sleeping in their soft beds, leaving us to watch their ship." This was the first stroke of luck, or perhaps divine intervention. The 3 white officers in charge of the Planter, a heavily armed Confederate transport steamer, had defied direct martial orders. Instead of sleeping on board as required, they had docked at the Charleston wharf and gone ashore for a night of partying, leaving the enslaved crew to guard the guns. It was the mistake Robert Smalls had been waiting for his entire life. "Get the steam up," Smalls ordered, quietly. Part 1. The Impossible Pilot. To understand the sheer audacity of this moment, one must understand the machine. The CSS Planter was not a dinghy, it was a side-wheel steamer, 147 feet long, armed with a 32-pounder pivot gun and a 24-pounder howitzer. It was a jewel of the Confederate Navy, used to ferry ammunition and supplies to the ring of forts that protected Charleston, the cradle of the secession. Smalls was listed on the ship's manifest as a wheelman. In reality, he was a virtuoso pilot. Born into slavery behind the house of his master in Beaufort, Smalls had been sent to Charleston to work. He had learned the currents, the sandbars, and the treacherous tides of the harbor better than any white officer. He carried the map of the ocean in his mind. But intelligence in a slave was dangerous. Competence was suspicious. Smalls had to hide his brilliance behind a mask of servitude. He watched Captain Ellison. He studied how the captain signaled the forts with the steam whistle. He memorized the hand gestures. He internalized the posture of command. For months, he had been planning this heist. He had confided in the other enslaved crewmen. "We can stay here and die as slaves, or we can take this ship, sail past the guns of the Confederacy, and hand it to the Union blockade." At first, they thought he was mad. The harbor was a ring of fire, guarded by Fort Johnson, Fort Moultrie, Castle Pinckney, and the terrifying colossus of Fort Sumter. To escape, they would have to sail directly under the cannons of all of them. "If we are caught," Smalls promised them, holding a stick of dynamite, "I will blow up the ship. We will not be taken alive." That was the pact, freedom or Valhalla. Part 2. The Departure. 3:25 a.m. The boiler pressure was rising. The wood smoke was the only variable Smalls couldn't control. If it was too thick, the sentries on the dock might wonder why a ship was preparing to leave at such an ungodly hour. "Hoist the flags," Smalls commanded. This was a critical detail. A ship leaving without colors was a target. They raised the Confederate naval jack and the South Carolina palmetto flag. To the casual observer, this was just an official transport mission starting early. Cast off. The ropes hit the water. The massive paddle wheels began to churn, slapping the black water. The planter groaned and pulled away from the southern wharf. Smalls stood in the pilot house, wearing the straw hat, his back to the dock. He knew the sentries were watching. He raised his hand in a lazy salute, just as Captain Ellison would have done. It worked. The sentries did not hail them. But the hard part had not even begun. They had to pick up the human cargo. Smalls turned the ship towards the West Atlantic wharf. There, hiding in the shadows of a docked steamer called the Etwan, were the families. Smalls' wife Hannah and their 2 young children, along with the wives and children of the other crew members. As the planter drifted close, the women and children were silently lifted onto the vessel. There were tears, but no sounds. Even the babies seemed to understand the gravity of the silence. Hannah grabbed Smalls' arm, her eyes wide with terror. "It is done," he whispered to her. "Go below deck. Whatever you hear, do not come up." Now, 17 black souls were aboard a stolen Confederate warship. Part 3. The Gauntlet.